Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Darren. So can we start with the first question?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Yeah. So the first question is, do you feel that you have strong political beliefs?
Yes.
May I ask you, why do you think that's the case?
So I think I've come to form my own political beliefs just out of just facts and research. And I've tried to not let just, simple opinion try to influence that. So I think as I've become more informed and as I've looked more into facts, into research, into data, I think that's allowed me to really develop, I guess my political beliefs very strongly.
Yeah. So namely, you're telling me that your political beliefs are very much based on evidence-based points, right?
Evidence-based, yeah. Yes.
Mhm. And do you think that's a strong political belief because you think most people might not do that, or why do you think that makes it a strong political belief?
Yeah, I think a lot of politics. I think most politics in general are very opinionated, and they're not necessarily fact-based or research-based. So I think it's just really important to take the facts into account. And I'm not saying that opinions don't belong in politics. I think they do, but I think it's also important to consider the facts as well, along with the opinions.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for answering that question. Could we move to the next question?
We'll see.
Yeah. So the next question is, how has where you live and the era you lived in influenced your political beliefs? So for example, if I were to answer this question, I would say that I live part-time in Mexico, but I spend most of my life in the border, and that influenced how I see a lot of things. Also the fact that I'm a man, that I'm Latino, that I grew up with mostly Latinos.
Right.
Those are the examples of how the time where you live has affected your beliefs. Do you think that has been the case for you?
Yes. So I think similar to you, growing up on the border, kind of, I guess, that's kind of how I started forming my political beliefs at first. But I guess in a way slightly different because while I think the living on the border has influenced, for example, my views on immigration. That's just always been a constant ever since forever, really. So I've always been very pro-immigration, regardless of my how my overall politics have changed. Give me a second because I'm changing lanes over here. So yeah, I think growing up in a place like Laredo, that's it's very socially conservative, but they advocate for a lot of fiscally liberal policies. I think that's kind of, I'll explain it. That's kind of I think how I started growing up with that. So those socially conservative beliefs. But as I've grown up, as I've moved to other cities, I've moved to Boston, to I've spent some time in Mexico City, I've spent some time in Italy, and I feel like I've just become more aware of situations regarding my how I would feel about social conservatism, and I think I've slowly begun to reject that. Well, I already did, but back then, I began rejecting, that kind of Catholic upbringing that I was raised in. I think that that's definitely influenced. I feel like I've always been pro-immigration. I feel like at first Catholicism definitely, that Catholic upbringing really influenced my politics at first. But it wasn't really until I moved that I started changing how I would see that. Regarding other policies, yes, I think there's, especially with like fiscal policies. I was definitely more on the conservative side in Laredo, just because, again, that may be a cultural thing. because like a songwriter, you kind of just, or coming from like an immigrant background, you kind of just taught that, to work hard, that you, um, pretty much that you're going to reap what you sow kind of attitude. So I feel like that in a way that's what influence that kind of those kinds of beliefs at first. But when I started looking at the grand scope of things, just the way anything I have to do, for example, like with an economy and how it all works together, that's when I moved away from it was when I started shifting my beliefs to a slightly more fiscally liberal or even fiscally moderate, I guess, politics.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm seeing how definitely the place where you live has had an effect on the way you see things. And it's very interesting how simply having the proximity to other people, other beliefs, other ideas can have a huge change in someone. So
Oh yes.
very interesting. Yeah, it makes you think that someone that might always stay in the same place might
Right.
might always believe the same things, not so much because that person might be close-minded or anything like that, but more because that
Right.
person was never exposed to other people, other ideas.
Anything else. Right. And like I said, I was always grew up like being pro-immigration, for example. And that's because growing up in the border, I think most people are, your families are, you want your families to do well, you want your friends to do well. So I think, and I guess that never really changed over time, but for other politics, yeah, that I think those things definitely change.
Hmm.
And I mean, all about my move to Boston, so I mean that changes things a lot.
Yeah.
More education in general changes things a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I appreciate it. That was a very detailed answer, and I was able to note everything down. So thank you. And unless you want to add something else, we can move to the next question.
No, let's go. Let's move to the next question.
So question 3 is, do you think your personal political beliefs affect who you make friends with?
See, is that making friends in the present or maintaining friendships from the past?
Good question. I would say both of them, but
Okay.
but mostly specifically as of making new friends. Yeah.
In terms of making new friends, I think I've started to see that shift, where back then that wouldn't be a deciding factor in terms of making friends, and now it feel like it kind of has. It's definitely had an effect. I, especially with just with polarized politics, with everything going on with the ongoing pandemic, for example, how that's become very polarized too. Yeah, I think that's definitely become extremely polarized. With, for example, Republicans leaning more towards more far right political views, maybe some views that are more associated with hatred, with xenophobia, etc. Back then, well, see, and when it comes to maintaining friendships, no, that hasn't really affected some of my friendships. I think because I think those friendships were, and back then were founded on, just the simple difference in opinion.
Oh, sorry, let me stop you. I couldn't hear you for the.
And
Oh, Darren, can you hear me?
kind of, I guess it was a kind of,
Oh, Darren, can you hear me?
I guess there were different those kinds of.
Oh, Darren, can you hear me?
What?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. What you
Yeah,
said?
I couldn't hear you for the past 10 seconds. It was buffering.
No, you're cutting off.
I know you
cutting off.
said,
I can only hear you in pieces.
okay, can you hear?
Okay.
Okay.
I can hear you, but yes, yes. Okay, is that when it comes to maintaining old friendships, friends that have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you better now.
Okay, so yeah, so I was saying like about maintaining friendships from back then with with people who have different political beliefs. I think I guess I've had sort of mixed experiences. I think there are friendships that I've kind of lost. Well, definitely love lost. There are friendships that I've maintained, and I think that's just because um, I guess, with those friends, I guess we've maintained, you know, those that difference in political beliefs was kind of respected, back then, and we were able to maintain that friendships because of that, because we respected each other's points of view. Um, so yeah, when it comes to making new friendships, I think I've definitely felt like the politics side of it has definitely influenced that. When it comes to maintaining old friendships, I've seen mixed results. So I've had friendships. I have friends that I think that I've grown away from, and I've had friends that we've been able to respect each other's opinions because we always have. And yeah, I mean, I think it's and there are friends that are willing to have those kinds of conversations, and um, they're willing to listen to other ideas. They're willing, um, despite the difference in opinions. So I think I've seen mixed results with that.
I see. Yeah. So let me ask you this. So do you feel like if you were to start a new friendship, if that
Yeah.
friend, even if that person thinks very different than you politically, but if that
Yes.
friendship were to start through conversations that have nothing to do with politics, in
Yes.
that case, do you think it's more likely that you could actually become friends with that person?
I think so. Just because I think that um, I always try to understand where people come from.
True.
I don't try to be judging at first, and I've also just always learned to respect people, regardless of their opinions. I've always tried to consider that um, they might just not be informed about something, or um, they might not have lived certain experiences that have allowed them to be informed. So I think I can, yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. I don't think I'm as cutthroat when it comes to making the types of other friendships. But yeah, I think it's for me at least. I think it's just really important to consider where other people come from when it comes to political beliefs, because to me that's where the subjectivity matters. So I don't
Yeah.
think it's yeah, because I mean if the way I see it, if for example, the new Democrats or the new liberals, in the United States, if the constant message is preaching about inclusivity, then there's no point in excluding people, from certain groups or from certain things just because they don't have the same knowledge, the same background that you do. So that's just the way I think.
Mhm. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and the next question is pretty similar.
Yeah.
But it asks, what makes a good friend? Do you think they have to have the same political beliefs?
A good friend, um, I think so. I think at least nowadays, given the current climate, because the current climate isn't, it wasn't created because of um, people being spoiled or people being this. I mean, it's because people are genuinely concerned um, about certain issues. So, excuse me, hold on, I'm just kind of pulling in somewhere. So yeah, I think a good friendship really can really have that sort of level of empathy um, when understanding like those politics, because I think that's really what it comes down to nowadays. Sometimes it just comes down to a difference in empathy for other people, really. And that's really, in my opinion, I think that's what a good friendship is about. Being able to empathize with that other person. Um, so I think while I can see myself being friends with someone who has different political beliefs, I can see myself making better friends with people who share those political beliefs, because there's a level of empathy that's just not reached in other situations.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. So that's true. Like friendships are strongly based on being able to empathize and care about each other. So when you're not able to empathize in the same way, in a macro social way, in a political way, I can see why that could affect a friendship. Uh, yeah, makes sense.
Right?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I never really thought it in that sense. So thank you.
Mm. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and we can move to the question number 5, um,
Okay.
which is, do you think your family ever has influenced your personal political beliefs?
My family, um, yes, absolutely. Because the reason I'm pro-immigration, and I've always been pro-immigration, despite having been conservative at one point and now being relatively liberal nowadays. Um, I think, yeah, that's a part of that reason is my own family. You know, the difficulties they lived because of a very broken immigration system, and how certain things just aren't fair. There's not a certain ethical treatment that is given to immigrants in almost every regard. So yes, absolutely, and I feel that that's one of the topics I think that's probably influenced that kind of belief the most. Um, I my family's mostly comprised of women, so I feel that that's allowed me to just kind of, though I can't empathize with um, the difficulties that women face with that um, I feel I can definitely sympathize, and I feel like that pain that a lot of women in my family feel. I think I can, though I can't really put myself in those shoes, I can definitely um, resonate on that level of pain, right? So that level of pain and suffering. So I think yes, that's definitely influenced how I just even how I just definitely have seen my political beliefs, of course.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it as well. And yeah, I think we can move to the next question,
Okay.
which is number 6. How has the media influenced your political beliefs?
Um, I try not to let it influence my beliefs, because I know how biased the media can be. Sometimes I'm not saying without reason, but sometimes just by being impartial. Sometimes by advocate, or in other words, covering some stories and not covering others, or covering part of a story and not covering part of another. So when it comes to the media, I just try to, be or consider very objective points of view. So I've tried not to let that um, influence my political beliefs, just because, like what I was mentioning before about um, forming my politics based on evidence, based on research, based on data. And I think the media can do a very good job of just being impartial, of concealing some facts, regardless of what political affiliation they might have. So I'm gonna go with, in my particular instance, I'm gonna go with no. I really do my best to not let the media influence my political beliefs. Um, as much, I think. I mean, of course, there are certain things that the media can inform you, but I think it's something I try to do is just try to inform myself of um, kind of other sources, kind of see the big picture rather than just looking at one single media source.
Yeah, it seems like you're expressing that there's an extent to which one cannot really avoid being influenced by the media, because it's
Right.
not so much about the way they present it, it's about what they present and what they do not present.
Right.
So you might never even be aware about something else. So yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm,
Exactly.
cool, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for that one too. And we can go to the next one.
Okay.
Question 7, it's, do you think people should always remain loyal to their political beliefs?
People should always remain loyal to their political beliefs. Mm, no, no, and the reason I say that is because they're there are always going to be facts. I think they're always going to be, in my opinion, I think they're always going to be, there's always going to be a sense of a right answer to a lot of problems, in my opinion. And by a right answer, I mean something that takes into account ethics, something that takes into account logic, you know. And I think it's just really it's really good to have an open mind about politics, making sure you consider the other side of the argument before really formulating your own. And I think that's how political beliefs can be made stronger, I think, and that's how they can really be cemented. When you have the full facts from the other side, and then you pick from there, right? Um, yeah, I think I don't think it's good to be necessarily loyal to political beliefs because things can always change. And it's just always good to have an open mind, but I think it's good to be true to just kind of oneself and just kind of really, like I said, it's just a matter of looking at the grand picture of things. So, in the essence, let's just say in this very rough example where Democrats are right, 95% of the time, and Republicans are right 5% of the time, right? Let's just say, right? Then it's really important to take into consideration, that of course the 95%, that's always going to be, that might just be a constant for some people, but I think it's just really important to look at, that small number of cases where, a party or a political affiliation might not be right about something. So, and I know that question goes beyond just political parties, but I think it's just really important to not stay just very loyal to something because times change. And while I don't think people can just be continuously move on and, generally speaking, towards the left or over time, because I feel like that's just kind of the trend that exists, that politics has been moving generally to the left, forever really. But I think there's going to be a point where, you can't just continue moving to the left forever. And there's going to be a point where that might stop at some point. So I think it's just important to, just kind of, like I said, keep all these different things in mind. Not necessarily stay loyal, but to just have an open mind.
Okay. Got it. Thank you for that answer as well. Yeah, I think that definitely answers the question. So we can go to the next one. And I really like this question myself. The question is, what criteria do you tend to use when making political decisions? For example, do you tend to use moral criteria, practical, cultural, economic, etc.?
So I think, moral and ethical decision making is, I think, the most important when formulating political opinions, right? So, of course,
Did you say moral and ethical, or?
Moral and ethical,
Okay.
yes. Just because I feel like that's just gonna be the expression of how people feel in general, right? And how people feel will influence how policies are made. So I think really the moral and ethical aspects of just any political decision are probably the most important to make. I think so a lot of people, I think when they hear the economic side, they think, oh, well, it's kind of just fiscally conservative, or it's just all about saving money, or, that kind of thing. And that's not necessarily true. I think the economic aspect is probably one of the most important as well, just because, a lot of people think that's just, that's what it's really all about. When you hear the economics, it's like, oh, well, it's all, conservative and fiscally conservative, and it's all free market, and that's not necessarily true. So I think it's really important to consider, that economic aspect and how that can really swing both ways. It doesn't really, in my opinion, economics doesn't really favor one political party, at least not anymore. Yes, and that other things that are important, I think, are, I feel like the moral and the ethical part is really just what formulates most political beliefs to begin with. You take into consideration the consequences of certain politics and how they affect certain people and how they might be either ethical or unethical. And I just think, I think that's a very important premise or basis. I think the economic aspect is very important too, but I think I also look at the moral and the ethical, the morals and the ethics of that. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking about it, one of the things you were saying when you were talking about economics and going back to how things are very polarized. I think it's very unfortunate that talking about economics, financial responsibility have kind of become like something that conservatives don't, and obviously that's not the case.
Yeah, that's not necessarily true. I mean, you can be, you can have a very productive economy. That's not all, what's the word, that's not necessarily 100% free market, right? Or you can have, there's just many situations where I feel like the left is correct on some economic topics. They don't necessarily have to reject capitalism completely to do that. So that's just the way I feel about it. But that's, I did study economics, so that's that might just be, I guess, kind of my bias or my experience with that. So
yeah, got it. Thank you so much for answering that one too. And the last question that I want to ask you is, what role do you believe the government should play when making political decisions? So for example, should the government provide suggestions to people, give directions, or maybe stay completely out of people's political beliefs and decisions? So for example, today the government really pushes about having a vaccine, but some people say that they shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
That's tricky because some people will think that the government doesn't act in their best interest. And given the history of how government has worked, I don't think that's far off in the past, right?
Yeah.
Just like government can help and support people, it's also been proven to oppress people. So those have been instances, maybe say in other countries. I'd say it's definitely been an instance here in the United States as well. When you think of things like police brutality or the lack of civil rights, segregation, things like that, right? It's hard to just give, I think, government the full authority to just convince people and just kind of influence the way they make decisions, because I feel in a sense that can be unethical. But however, in the instances where they might be correct about something, like say the vaccines, right? Say vaccinations, wearing masks, things like that. I genuinely do feel that they act in the best interest of the people. So I think it really just comes down to that. If it comes to answering the question, are they really acting in the best interest of their people? And if they are, then yes, then government should help people and inform them about their decisions. If they are unethically and immorally trying to influence people's decisions without, I guess you could say, without really acting in their best interest, I think that's when government should step away. Kind of let the liberty of expression to roam, right? The liberty of thought, the liberty of making certain decisions. some topics or some situations might require that more than others, like the pandemic, for example. But some other situations might be different. For example, it's not anything that has to do with economic policy, for example. So yeah, I mean, that's just the way I think about it. Is I think it really comes to answering the question: are they acting in the best interest of their people? And I think that just really comes down to maybe not a majority, not a minority, but just in general. And of course, looking at the whole picture. So are they acting in the best interest of the people in general? And I think that can really answer a lot of questions as to what government should do and shouldn't do. Yeah, because I mean, if you give government too much of that power, you might end up with a very autocratic government, and that's not good. But if you keep them too far away from those influences, then that's also not a good thing. So it's really just a matter of finding that balance and trying to see, when the government can act in the best interest of the people.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes sense. Yeah, that will be answering the 9 questions, Aaron. Unless you don't want to add anything else, we could end the recording and the interview.
Okay, no, I think that's it. That's it for me.
Okay, awesome. Well, really appreciate it. This is definitely not just for me for grad school or grade. It's something that is very interesting to me, and I really enjoy doing this interview to you. So thank you again for that.
No, thank you.